Hello, my name is Arnan Sipitakiat from Chiang Mai University in Thailand. It's my great pleasure to speak to you today. I'd like to share with you my experience creating technologies and using them with schools. So I have a technical background. I teach computer engineering, but I did my graduate degree at MIT with David Cavallo and Seymour Papert, thinking a lot about how to create innovative learning technologies. And since my day at MIT, I was really passionate about creating programmable devices and using sensors and actuators to empower learning in classrooms and in other learning settings. So I will show you a few examples today of the kinds of work that I do with schools using programmable devices. But also I'd like to show you factors that I think are important to sustain these types of learnings in an educational context as well. So the topic today would be sustainable learning innovations. And I'd like to start by showing you one concrete example. So at a school that I work, I have a network of schools. I work with secondary level students, so teenagers basically. And when I go into schools, the most important thing for me to do is to identify themes that are meaningful to the learners. Now, since the schools that I go and work with are typically semi-rural schools, so the theme that worked really well for me was creating automated systems, and it usually involves agriculture. So the example that you see in the picture here is a fish farm. It's a project that the school has been doing for a while, but they had a problem. In the winter in Thailand, in the morning it's quite cold. And when the water gets cold, the fish doesn't eat very well, so that limits the growth. So the school had an idea of regulating the temperature of the water by creating a solar heated water tank, which is the black tank that you see here in the picture. And the idea was that they have a water tank, an existing water tank. That's the blue plastic tank you see in the diagram here. They wanted to transfer water down to the black tank. And the reason why it's black is because they think it would absorb heat during the day, so the water would be warm. And they would use that warm water in the fish tanks in the morning. So my role initially was to help them automate the system by adding electric valves, water valves, so that the transfer will happen automatically. But when we visited the site, it was a very hot day. And I happened to touch the black tank. And it wasn't hot. It was actually quite cold. So a question was raised whether or not the idea was valid. And that created sort of a panic in the school because they've already invested money in creating the black tank, and the project has been going on for quite a while. So for me to go in and ask this fundamental question was a little bit disturbing. But what we decided to do, since no one was quite sure what the answer was, meaning why the water we felt it was cold during the day, we decided to do a proof scientifically. So what we did was that we installed temperature sensors to measure the water temperature in the black tank and in the blue tank, and then made a comparison. So we left it running, left the data logger run for about a day and a half, and this is the graph that we have. And what we discovered was that, and you can see that the red arrow is pointing to in the morning, where they would typically use the water from the black tank. You can see from the graph that although the temperature of the black tank is actually higher than the water in the blue tank, the reason for this is very different from what the students had initially expected. That is, it's warmer not because of the black color that was painted on the tank, but it's more because of the material. The black tank was constructed using cement, whereas the blue tank was plastic. So it ended up being the insulation property of the black tank that had a greater impact on the temperature. And basically they were just in luck that in the morning the temperature in the black tank was higher. So this created a great opportunity for me to introduce them to ideas in science and scientific exploration. I challenged the students to guess what the graph would look like before we saw the actual recordings. And they made many predictions, and we had a great discussion about why some parts of the graph were correct and why some parts were different from the actual results. So my point of showing this example is that I think throughout the years that I've been working on projects like this, I've been pretty good at identifying and creating situations where I know good learning would happen, good discussions can happen. But this is not the only factor that is important in creating learning environments. I started off quite naively, thinking that creating good examples will change everything in schools. But in fact, after this experience working with students, that school stopped working with me. Not because they didn't like what I did, but simply because they were busy. Students had to do exams. So this activity that they were doing with me was an extracurricular activity. So it was kind of pushed aside. Other things were more important, and that's the reason why they didn't continue. And situations like this happened over and over. So it was then that I started to realize that in order to create a sustainable innovation, it's more than just creating good content and good learning activities. And this is sort of my naive summary of what I think are important factors. The red is the materials, the content and tools, all the technologies, but it's also about the teachers and the parents, the mindsets that they have about what's important, what counts as good learning. So it's the socio-cultural factors. And there's the institution factor as well. So in this fish farm example, it was the principal, the school principal, that decided that the team of students should focus on their exams and stop working on this project. So, just to make a comparison, an innovation, an initiative like what I did, although the school participated voluntarily, we were not really part of the education system. We were just something extra. So it's like an appendix. So I'd like to call it the appendix phenomenon. So we're part of the school, we're operating in the school, but we're not really needed. And if we cause trouble, they could get rid of us, no problem. Another thing that I've noticed was that the interest level in innovations, especially those that involve technology, the enthusiastic level goes up in the beginning. So that's the green part in this graph. So it's like the honeymoon period. But then the interest drops. This happens over and over again. So this is the second section in the graph. So from the fish farm example, when I finally re-established the communication with the school, the level of excitement and interest in the technology was not the same as before, because I think the first time they saw how you can use sensors, how you can program devices, it was very exciting. But the second time you see it, it's like playing with an old toy. So the level of excitement drops dramatically. And there's a risk of failure right there if nothing is done further than that. It becomes just something that you've done and you don't necessarily want to continue. But with the example of the fish farm project, although the teachers weren't as enthusiastic the second time, we figured out a solution. That is, we have a plan to use the project as a learning object, so that when teachers teach science. They would come to the fish farm and then use the project as a learning resource. And we have plans to create more, so that kind of makes sense to the teachers, why we're doing all these projects and how they can be used in the long run. So for this particular school, we negotiated for a way of making sense of what we were doing that worked for the teachers. And that's how they continued the work on this project. And I think the purpose of showing this graph is not to say that it's bad that when you do an innovation, if you have the second phase, it means you did a bad job. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think this is the nature of how things are. So the first phase is like the honeymoon period, right? You enjoy, you're excited by the technology. And the second phase is a natural thing to happen. It might be necessary to happen as well, because it allows you to think critically about what it means to really incorporate that kind of innovation, that kind of technology in the learning environment. And it allows you to go to the third phase, which is to me, it's the sustainable phase. So if you can go through phase 1 and 2, if you go to schools and you realize that there are these phases, I think it will help you plan better for what you do. So just so that I don't keep going for too long, I think this, I will stop here. It shows, I hope it shows you the kind of work that I do. And I hope that it's useful, and I hope that you can adapt some of these ideas to the work that you do. So if you have any questions or you would like to know more about the projects that I do, please feel free to contact me. So it was a pleasure to talk to you today, and I look forward to maybe visiting. I have many friends in Mexico who I haven't met for a while. So that's it. Thank you very much for having me.